Welcome to Go Sports Tactics. Got Corey Hall from the Los Angeles Ironmen. The team that won the only event so far of 2020, the Las Vegas Open. It was a really good look for you guys. You actually beat X Factor twice at this tournament. Is Randy picking up paintballs off the ground? 3 minutes we've been into this game so far.
Billy makes a good move into the snake, and this is where he actually gets penetration on us, which is scary. His timing is impeccable.
All good paintball players are going to fill out given an opportunity, but having that big turret up in the center with A-Rod, it was just impossible to get out.
You're going to see LJ make the move into the snake, and it's like a coordinated move right here. It's just so clean. And what you'll see A-Rod do very smartly here is he shoots him in his first interaction and doesn't continue to try and shoot him. You see him come over top, shoot him, and then he doesn't come out to try and do it again. Look at him right there. He kind of looks over, waiting for the ref to come back. That's a little confidence thing right there. You don't want Archie to get confident.
Before we jump into this final match, let's take a look at how these competitors got into this last battle here at the Ultimate Shootout number 3. Infamous's emerging star Harrison Fry had 2 close fights en route to his finals appearance. He first took down Aftermath's Andrew Wyatt in the quarterfinals. Wyatt took the early initiative, but Harrison used his creative athleticism to launch attacks, hitting buzzers and making some jump shots, putting up a sizable lead. Even though Wyatt stormed back, putting up points of his own and making it close, Harrison Fry was able to put the finishing touches on and move on to play Jeremy Zimmerman in the semifinals. That semifinals was a nail-biter. Harrison was the one to go up early, winning a couple of long-distance gunfights and going on a kill streak. But after going down 0-6, Zimmerman won a gunfight of his own and got aggressive, taking ground and hitting buzzers and eventually taking the lead. Zimmerman was only 1 point away from victory, the score 19-11. But undaunted, Harrison Fry was able to come from behind. It was one of the best games we've seen in the Ultimate Shootout, and Harrison Fry emerged victorious. He now faces his teammate, Cody Mikowski, in the finals. Cody Mikowski has been the most consistent player in Infamous the past few years. He is a monster gunfighter, and his ability to read the field and make the right decisions in pressure situations has earned him the respect of his peers. He needed all those skills in his quarterfinal fight against Fred Berkeley. That match could not have been closer as the lead went back and forth, and it looked like Berkeley was going to take the win. Mikowski fought his way back after being on the ropes 17-15. And in the semifinal match, Cody Mikowski took on Chad Boucher. They put up a huge lead 10-0. He had a harder time putting those last few points on the board as Chad Boucher started a comeback. But in the end, Mikowski took the victory and a solid win against a tough and seasoned competitor. He now matches up with Fry, his teammate on Infamous, here in the finals at Ultimate Shootout number 3.
I like to trick people. I think that's the cool thing about paintball. It's like chess on steroids. I play everywhere. Wherever Ryan thinks that my team needs me the most, that's where I'm going to play. My name is Archie Montemayor, and I play for San Antonio X Factor.
Texas paintball was a good old boy sport.
These guys are ruthless.
I saw skin, it was hand, all hand, 6 balls in a hand.
Never thought as a collective of young kids would we ever make it.
It really came down to one guy that said, I'm gonna see what they can do.
Sometimes in life you gotta take that jump. We won a pro event our first year, and that almost never happens.
Success can be like one of the worst things.
I don't know what Grayson's talking about. I probably won the argument.
We need to just kill this now.
Ask who's gonna stick around and who's not, but we're not going out this way.
Welcome to Go Sports Live. I'm Matty Marshall. I got Dan Napoli in the seat today. We're going to have a very thorough conversation about paintball storytelling and also about the best kids in Texas and a lot of the work that he's done, some iconic films. First of all, though, everyone mark your calendars. We do have the Virginia Pro Paintball Exhibition coming up Halloween weekend, 31st and the 1st. of November as we are getting ready for World Cup. And then World Cup's going to be hitting 12th through the 15th. Can't wait for that. As you know, we've been living in the COVID world. We've only had one big event this year. So can't wait to get back to the battles. And that's going to be going down again, Virginia exhibition, and then Hollywood weekend, and then also World Cup, the event that we're definitely waiting for. And we're keeping the action coming at you with the Ultimate Shootout. Ultimate Shootout number 4, battle number 2 in the quarterfinals. Jeremy Zimmerman, Fred Berkeley is going down. Monday Night Paintball. It's a thing. So every single Monday night, 8 o'clock Central Time, we're going to be bringing you guys battles, and we're in the quarterfinals at Ultimate Shootout number 4. So, Dan, how you doing, bud?
Good, Matty, man. Thanks for having me on. I loved watching that promo of Harrison and Cody Mikowski. That's really cool. I think Cody Mikowski is so underrated. I'm so stoked to see him get a little love. So very cool.
Yeah, Cody Mikowski. So, he did very well in Ultimate Shootout number 3. And if you haven't seen it, you definitely should check it out. Not you, but just everyone in general. I totally agree that he's hugely underrated. I think he proved that. So he's going to be taking a seat. One of the cool things that I like about the Ultimate Shootout is that we are trying to provide a venue for dudes to get paid. It's still a work in progress, but we're getting to the point where at least we can put up a decent price package at the finale. The more people that sign up to Go Sports, the bigger this. It's like the more Dan, this is what we're going to get into. Putting asses in seats. What does it take to tell stories, make people give a shit, and put asses in seats? And that's what we're trying to do here with the Ultimate Shootout. That's what we've been trying to do with the NXL. That's what you've been trying to do with your sports storytelling expertise and these iconic documentaries that you've done, which we're going to crack open. We're going to discuss this, but that's what we're trying to do. So with the finale, Cody now and Harrison, they made it into the finals. If you finish 1 and 2 at an Ultimate Shootout, you get into the finale and you have a chance to win $7,000 for first place at the finale when we get to that battle. Right now we're in Ultimate Shootout 4. Logan took down Andrew Wyatt in the quarterfinals. Now it's going to be Jeremy Zimmerman and Fred Berkeley. We'll see who wins that one. Got to tune in and check it out. But let's talk about that, Dan. I feel like there's a lot that you and I need to discuss because you and I have these epic. Like anytime I look at my phone, I'm like, Dan Napoli's calling. I'm like, well, do I have an hour? Because this is going to be an awesome. But I'm going to have to talk to this dude for like 45 minutes at least. So because we always have and it's been that way for well over a decade because we've worked on a lot of cool projects together. I mean, you've been involved in this at a fundamental level on the back end, producing these awesome stories for a long period of time as a producer, as a director, but you did get started doing music on one of the fundamental seminal paintball films. So maybe we just start there. I don't want to spend a ton of time necessarily on your back catalog because you and I could talk about your back catalog for a long period of time. And I definitely want to narrow in on what's current and best kids and telling stories and what you think the current landscape looks like. But I feel like I wouldn't be doing your time spent in this game justice if we didn't at least lay out the red carpet a little bit and let you describe in your own words some of the cool stuff that you've been able to work on over the years that kind of brought us to Best Kids. And let's just let everyone know right away, Best Kids in Texas, San Antonio X Factor documentary talking about their whole story. That's basically the impetus of this conversation, but you're one of those guys I was like, man, I got to get Dan Napoli on, but it's you and I could probably talk for 3 hours about all this crazy stuff. But so Best Kids is now getting a wider distribution. Let's talk about that and then kind of crack in real quick to your back catalog and how you got to this point, and then we'll kind of speed up and get to the current part.
Yeah, man. Dude, yeah, we can ramp all over. Best Kids in Texas is out, it's out now in like a mainstream distribution standpoint, iTunes, Amazon Prime, getting ready to go to international distro on that stuff. I'm almost positive it's like the only one in there now. It's the first pro paintball documentary to get that wide platform release, which is really cool. Yeah, man, like my background, I'll try to keep it tight, and then I'll just do the Bo Carson Google me for the the deep dive for anybody who's interested. I hope Alex
Google,
Racing listens,
Google me,
right?
bro. Google
Yeah.
me, bro. Who are you? Google me, bro.
Yeah, man. But so right now I work for a company called Herd at Films that I have for the last couple of years. Awesome place. From 1999, right out of journalism school until 2017, I worked in paintball. I've been both in the marketing side of stuff. I was a sports marketing major, and then the creative, the filmmaker side, or the video side. I worked for a company called Warp Sports that was super popular in the late 90s and early 2000s. It was a national boutique retailer and then private label of paintball stuff. They were owned by Ed Poorman, who owned Avalanche. Super influential pro paintball team. Chris Lasoya, Rocky Cagnoni, Todd Martinez, Travis Lemansky at one point, LB. They were really Rusty Glaze got his pro start there. They were really the precursor to Dynasty in being kind of like the first like big rock stars, if you will. Through that, I got connected with Patrick Sporer and Brian Benini, the creative duo behind Push. Pat let me be a little baby grommet on that project and do all the music licensing for him. So I learned that process and, how to get permission for all this amazing music that he scored and really saw how that worked. I was cool enough. I think the only song in that soundtrack I will take credit for is the Less Than Jake song at the end, because I think poor Pat was just so sick of me lobbying him. He was like, fine, dude, I'll find a spot.
We'll find a way to work it in, dude. I don't want to hear it anymore.
Fine,
Less Than Jake, they're in.
Fine.
Okay, cool.
Just
fine.
one. Just one spot. Just one. But yeah, we next thing that came after that was a Tony Hawk trick tip style video called Avalanche 101. That's where I met Brad Mon. First thing Brad and I ever worked on together. He's been a collaborator of mine for like 20 years. Also, Sammy Anzari is another place where we crossed there. Went on to start a video magazine in the mid-2000s called Jawbreaker Video Series that Brad and I did. Went out on my own, started my own production company. Through that, started doing brand work for Planet Eclipse in the mid-aughts.
Well,
by 2010.
Just real quick.
Oh, yeah.
Just real quick, because this is where you and I had our first kind of creative endeavors together, I guess you could say, was because of Jawbreaker, because I was going to be one of the guys that was a character in the show.
In episode 2.
I was a guest in episode 2, and then which I don't have any more of. Is there any way? Is that like lost forever, or can I get one of those? Because I don't have access to that media anymore. No way. Tell me you got one on tap right now. That would be tight. But I'm just saying. So that's how.
Magazine.
So that's kind of where I had known. Obviously I was a character in Push and Sunday Drivers. Did the intro for Sunday Drivers. Worked with Pat and Brian. So I knew, and then I obviously was very good friends with the guys at Avalanche because they were our direct competitors. And then I knew who you were because you worked also in the paint magazine realm. You were basically one of the cool kids in paintball. That's how I knew you. It was like, oh, that's Dan Napoli. He's one of the cool kids from the Midwest. He's a punk rock dude, skater guy, played baseball in college. Like, he's a super cool dude. And I was like, okay, cool. That's like, before I knew you, that's what I knew of you. And then then you started the Jawbreaker thing, and then I was and then Rocky couldn't do it or whatever. So then I started hosting that. But that combined with me doing the stuff for the MPPL in Huntington Beach was kind of the very first thing that gave me what I do now and still to this day and have done. So you were one of the first people, including Chuck Hench and the WDP guys the people at the, and in those areas that were like, yeah, let's let Matty do it. He'll be good at this. So you're to blame.
Well, dude, so first, like, I have the mirror experience of meeting you. I remember it was Mardi Gras 2000, and Rocky was like, I'm going to go introduce you to Matt Marshall. He's another one of the cool kids. like all of these young, all of us that were around the same age that were starting to infiltrate paintball. And yeah, it was coming in there. I also want to say, Brad Bond would correct me on this, but I want to say that Brad showed, because Jawbreaker 2, this is super fun to get into this stuff, by the way, Matt. I'm thrilled to be able to talk about this. So you outlawed that, dude. You outlawed Jawbreaker 2, if you remember it. So you were playing for the Ironmen. You were all locked up in the void that was the original NXL, and you couldn't do any press. So you had to be in like street clothes. You had to come out there. And then ultimately, Brad showed that to, he'd have to step in and correct me. But I want to say he showed that to the WDP guys. They obviously knew who you were, but as taking like as like, look, dude, this dude's super gifted at this. You should let him, besides doing voiceover stuff. And I think that came to like a little bit of that stuff. So yeah, man, we go way back through that trajectory. And then you narrated the very first Planet Eclipse thing.
Yeah, so that's kind of because we did the Jawbreaker thing, which was super cool and fun, and that was an interesting experience. We had and what's actually interesting too is that the Paint Magazine Famous book's coming out in pretty soon here, and one of the that's a different one. I wish Haas had hit me up actually because I have an unpublished Marcus Nielsen article that I maybe I'll have to put in my book one of these days, but that could have made it in too. But Haas has been super busy, so it's like an unpublished aftershock thing. I think is what's getting in there. But anyway, so there was a lot of this. It was that Rocky Road type situation, man. There was like a crazy shit going on at the time. But again, you and I could spend an hour just discussing the ins and outs of and the trials and travails of being, on that cusp when the paintball wave was breaking at that moment. But what I think is pertinent to this conversation, seeing that we do need to wrap and get, or not wrap, but just get to Best Kids and talk about paintball storytelling, is that we learned a lot during those days. And I think that's kind of what I would like to kind of bookend and discuss a little bit, is what you learned about paintball storytelling in general, the game itself. And because I learned so much at that point in time about, at the end of the day, it's like, what is going to make people care about the sport of paintball? Obviously, the personalities are huge. I talk about the 5 fingers of the sports marketing fist constantly: heroes and villains, history, ongoing narrative, spectacle, and statistics, all coming together to punch you in the face, to make you give a shit and excited about watching something. And you and I have had these awesome creative conversations throughout the past, pretty much like, Jesus Christ, it's 2020 now. So almost like 17 years we've had these discussions and long conversations, to try to create something memorable and something interesting and something that people can be proud of, because the people are proud of the moments that they live and that they've experienced within the framework of this amazing sport that people love so much. And documenting those is both a task and also a trial, and also, kind of a responsibility in a way. So I think that us discussing those issues is probably the most pertinent thing that we can discuss. But you got your start doing it in paintball's golden age as that wave was breaking. So if you can maybe take us from there, lessons learned, and then how you got into doing the stuff with the clips, because I feel like that's where you're the most well-known. You made some iconic films doing stuff for Planet Eclipse, and it was just, those were some epic films, man. Like documenting some of the baddest ass dudes to walk the earth when it comes to paintball. And I think we definitely have to talk about that stuff too. But get me there. Get me from like being Jawbreaker, Warp Sports, punk rock kid from the Midwest, to getting to that point where Planet Eclipse is like, yeah, Dan, here's some money. Tell us some paintball stories.
Man, it's a lot to unpack there, Matty.
No pressure. No pressure. But I feel like that's kind of the point of this, is that, that's
no,
why I call
it is, though, dude.
Seat,
like, yeah. So I think the one thing, like, this is gonna sound so arrogant, but so I'll just preface that. But I also want to say that there was probably a collective of maybe 20 of us. One of the lessons I've learned, I feel like, is that like we were right. And what I mean by that is were talking earlier.
Love that.
You were talking earlier
Preach, brother.
about asses in the seats.
Yeah.
Making people care and putting individuals and taking people and I think in a lot of ways, I mean, this obviously has always been a part of filmmaking, but maybe if you talk about marketing overall has become very conscious of story and very story driven. But so, I set that up too. And again, there was a ton of, there was a lot of people infiltrated, but it's like doing something on Marcus Nielsen at the time and to be like, that dude's interesting. I don't know what's going to happen. It might be super messed up. It might be really cool. I don't know. But that kind of person. And you had a lot of champions of that idea. And Planet Eclipse was one of them in a general sense, which is so awesome. But what I think is important to understand is between, and again, Pat broke so much ground. There's so many different people. Chris Haas and Chris Stiltz at Paint. But in the mid-aughts, it was still kind of teetering a little bit about how important, I mean, there is a famous quote. I don't know. Perhaps it's a tall tale because I don't know if it really got said. I don't know if it really got said in this context, but it got.
I feel like I know what quote you're about to say. But go ahead. Sorry. Maybe I don't know.
You want to drop it?
Maybe we'll see.
So
is it that I don't care what name is on the back? Is it that one? I knew where you're going with this. See, we read each other's minds sometimes. All right, you go ahead.
Yeah.
You say it.
So again, I don't, the legend is whether this really got said or how it got said or whatever, but the legend was said that someone that owned a pro team had said, nobody cares or will ever care about the name on the back. They'll only care about my name on the front. So I can just interchange people and I mean, as a storyteller and a filmmaker, I couldn't agree with that less. I could feel like it's more about the stories of the strife of those individual people and those kind of that's just a perspective on spectacle, if you will, which is a really what might draw you in. And, nowadays it might stop you in a scroll, but it doesn't make you care about something. And I always felt that as filmmakers, our job was to tell a story, be genuine, and to make you care. Otherwise, why is the audience giving me their time? Why is Planet Eclipse investing, effort and budget into this kind of stuff like that? And Eclipse really got that, and especially as they grew and their stables were growing. Probably because, Jacko's super smart, Leds and Julian Carr, who are also smart, but also have more of an action sports background where that was more commonplace. I mean, again, we talk about the circle of people, everyone from Rob Ostamendi to Durder to you to Brad. So there's so many different, Miko, so many different people, but coming up through this world of action sports, skate, surf, snow, music, all this stuff meshes together. It's a foregone conclusion that you're yeah, dude, Flip's going to put out a new video this year. It's going to be amazing. And it's going to feature their dudes. That's just how, and it's going to I'm going to care about one way or another, whether it's what he's doing or who he is. I'm going to care about Jeff Rowley. And that's why I'm going to go do stuff. So that principle wasn't foreign to kind of a group of us, but at the time period, it was still not fully embraced. And I think it's certainly embraced now, but Eclipse got that. And so they really were okay, yeah, we think we should be promoting our teams and our athletes through story. And that's really kind of where we started the trajectory with them. That became, as I became a better filmmaker and a better storyteller, besides just doing small shorts or event wrap-ups, we got into doing stories. Like I said, I went to journalism school. So that's part of my background. So we launched Artifact Film Series, which was kind of meant to be our own 30 for 30, if you will. And through that, we had some of the stuff that people know. One Night in November that featured Chicago Aftershock. We did 2 pretty cool Dynasty films, Coming Home, when Oliver Lang returned to the team, and then 15. which a couple years back when they were keeping, which is insane to think about, a 15-year winning streak going where they've won at least one tournament every year. Did a really cool piece with Impact where they finally got their World Cup win called Holy Grail. And then, two Eclipse pieces, two historical ones, one called Unemployable that's really kind of on the start of the company. The last thing we did for them, which I think was called PE Evolution, it's one of the pieces I like the most. We told the story of the company's growth through the growth of design. So really through the perspective of Jack Wood, because I really didn't think that had been done before. And then it kind of culminates with Best Kids, who's interesting with X Factor, is probably the team I've shot the most over 14 years with Eclipse.
Well, I definitely want to get into Best Kids because that is the discussion of the moment, and in the sense that, people can go and consume that specific thing right this second. And also it's important because San Antonio X Factor had such an amazing year in 2019. They won 2 events. They won the series title and came into 2020, the year of COVID, as the team that was the favorite. So I just think it's super appropriate that is the story being forwarded at the moment because of a couple of reasons. One, well, it's super pertinent. These guys have, they kicked some ass last year after 5 years of not winning any tournaments, and they won the series title. And they have a super compelling story where they almost didn't exist. But I definitely want to dive into that. But I just think because, you have told some really fascinating stories over time, if we could just go back slightly and it's just talk about sports storytelling in specific, and I just think this is so important. Paintball is such a fascinating sport. It's so evolving when you're playing it with the spectacle. When you play paintball, you are so wrapped up into that specific instance. Oh, I'm being shot at. Oh, I'm screaming. I'm yelling. I'm listening. Oh my God, we're winning. We're losing. I'm getting shot. I'm shooting people. And I feel that the more that you play paintball, the less that you actually understand what it's going to take paintball to get to be something that other people care about. I mean, even when we were doing, discussions for the Ultimate Shootout, it was like, some people were like, well, we just need something super simple. I just need something where I'm on a plane. I got a mom there and she's like paintball. And I'm like, I can just explain it to her. And I'm like, that nothing that exists that's in the world that's big and huge and popular is that simple. Like there's no such thing. Like all of the video games that are super interesting and that have millions of people that play it, they're not that interesting. I'm sorry, they're not that simple. You can't just sit down and be like, yeah, well, let me explain exactly how, Dota works to everybody, or let me explain, the intricacies of every single Call of Duty map and all the guns you can have. Like, yes, at the end of the day, people are shooting each other. We're playing war and we're doing that in a video game. Sure, you could do that. That same thing with paintball. But as you kind of crack into it, I think that, and this is why we created the Ultimate Shootout the way that it is, where you have buzzers with different amounts of points. They change. You got kill streaks. There's different levels of understanding to this. So yeah, it's paintball. Sure, people are shooting people, but there's levels to it. And I think that like trying to simplify things is hurt us in the long run because, like look at baseball. Like baseball's been around for 150 years professionally. And it's a pretty simple concept, but there's a lot of intricacy there. Same with golf, same with American football. This has been something we've constantly talked about on this show, but since you are a sports storyteller and you've done some baseball stuff recently and you played baseball, I just feel this would probably, before we jump in hardcore to talking about, the ins and outs of how we actually tell the story, that we should talk about the importance of why we tell the stories the way we do, because the why is crucial. I mean, it is foundational.
Well, I think, Matty, that it is you have to think more broadly. I mean, some of this is about like a format thing. Like first of all, when you talk about paintball, until you do something like the Ultimate Shootout, as much as you try to simplify it, you can't really get away from the constraints, the issues that you have on the field when you're talking about making accessible to a new person to know what's happening. You don't have a center focal point. You don't have one battle. You don't have one ball. You have thousands. All these kinds of things like that. The thing too about the plane example that you gave earlier, I just don't know, and I think the streaming world has proven this, where story and character and connection is really what wins. And and especially you talk about documentaries of, it's just you find yourself watching something that you maybe weren't that into. You didn't know anything about this, but the next thing you know, you're 30 minutes into a documentary on the pro marble scene in Sweden, and you got to see how this goes. That's because, right?
Totally.
That's because you've connected, dude.
Just real quick. So one of the experiences that I've used over time, and there's so many different ones. You and I have had this discussion off camera multiple times, but I remember, look, the power of story is the most powerful thing on planet Earth. Money, religions, countries, legal fictions, all these things exist on the power of story. It's you and I are human beings. We're going to sit down and we're going to tell each other a story. And then based on the power of that story is going to dictate what the future is going to be, and things that we just literally make up in our heads becoming a reality in the world. And a lot of that has to do with how much you care about it, your investment from an emotional standpoint. And I remember going over to watch one of the first 24/7s where it was, Ricky Hatton was fighting Mayweather, and I was going to watch it with one of my buddies, and his girlfriend answered the door, and she's like, "Oh, Matty, what are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Oh, we're going to watch this boxing documentary, Ricky Hatton taking on Mayweather." And she's like, boxing's stupid. I hate boxing. That's violent. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't care. I'm paraphrasing, but it was, she was just not about it at all. So we were like, oh, it's okay, cool. So we bullshitted a little bit. And then I go watch it with my buddy and then take off. That was it. Didn't think about it much at all until we're showing up at the bar where everyone has to pay $15 to get in to watch this battle that's about to take place. And then sure enough, who shows up? This girl. And I look at the girl and I'm like, what are you doing here? And you're literally about to pay $15 to watch this battle that you said that you hate. You hate the thing. You don't care about the people that are fighting. You don't care about the fight. You think the fight's stupid and bad in general from a moral perspective because boxing's bad. So you hate boxing. You don't care about the people. Why are you here paying this money? And she was like, well, I just really hope that Mayweather gets his ass kicked. That's why. And I was like, oh, okay. So you got suckered in by story. Again, the power of story. Yuval Harari, who has written some awesome books, Sapiens, Homo Deus. But in Sapiens, he talks about the superpower that human beings have, and he calls it intersubjective narrative. And intersubjective narrative is the stories that we tell each other to make things that are just a concept or just an idea, just some bullshit we think of in our head, real in the world. So you have subjective narrative, which is, I think Oliver Lang is the best paintball player on planet Earth. That's subjective. That's me thinking that. And then there's objective, which is water is wet, the sky is blue, concrete is hard. This is unarguable. It's objective. Intersubjective is, just is the United States dollar, is Christianity, is is just these stories we tell each other that give things power. And so the power of story is super important. Thus being, if we want people to give a shit about paintball, we need people like Dan Napoli to tell paintball stories so that people wake up and go, oh, I really, really care about what San Diego Dynasty is doing today. And this is just, again, an ongoing theme here. But because I have you as a sports storyteller,
to hit me, Matt.
We got to talk about how that works. How did you come to that understanding? How do you deal with that reality? That visceral meat hook reality of knowing that is the case. then how do you go about creating things that make people give a shit about your subject?
So I don't know. So I'd say for me, somewhere into probably about 5 or 6 years, I've always been a story-driven person. Like I said, I went to journalism school, or a writer, read stuff. But somewhere maybe 3-4 years into the Eclipse stuff, like for me personally, and started thinking about it. And I've always had an interest ever since my first World Cup. Ever since I watched live the famous move in push of Rocky coming up over the top. I think it was on Davey, right? And like Camille,
David Williamson,
yeah. But we're watching that unfold, right? And I remember this. I actually just reread this in a proof from the famous book. It was Camille and an older lady on either side of me. We're watching this happen, and it's old school 10-man. You can't talk, and so like the tensions, literally you can cut it with a knife because you see them going back and forth, and they're both breaking my hand as they're squeezing. Like, it's gonna happen. And Rocky comes over, and I just, that always hit me as it was like, okay, if we can take that moment and translate it and transcend it to other people, they can see how awesome this game is, these people are, this world is. But 5 or 6 years after that, it just got to be, it all has its place. But for me, what I would call the spectacle, or we would jokingly call like the car crash reel, like, give me for us, give me like a gnarly hardcore song, give me Planes Mistaken for Stars, give me a bunch of shots of people getting their faces ripped off. I was just kind of done with that being that single layered. And then I also just felt like, and you could see it when people would watch this as I started doing other work outside the industry, and they would watch that stuff for about 15 seconds of it and be like, whoa, ooh, ah, and kind of get back into their scroll or...
Just real quick, though. Go ahead. So you asked me, you were like, hey, what, I got the most recent copy of Best Kids in Texas. I forced my wife to watch it. She knows, and you told me, you're like, hey, let me know when she tunes out. And I was like, okay, cool. Yeah. So and this is just kind of, again, right down what we're discussing. So she was in rapture, just thought it was super interesting during all the story elements, because, well, she obviously knows some of the people involved in this, because I officiated Ryan Brand's wedding. So she was like, oh my God, I had no idea that this was this in depth, that there was so much stuff that happened with that. So she was just watching it with all the story elements. I thought it was crazy. And then the second we get to like a hardcore paintball montage, where all the hardcore paintball dudes are going to be like, oh, finally we get some action. It's like you're watching an action movie and there hasn't been a battle scene in a while. And you're like, dude, I want to watch like dudes with like with like automatic grenade launchers. I want belt-fed machine guns. I need some crazy. Let's watch some Rambo shit go down. This is a war movie. I haven't seen any war yet. So it's like a paintball movie. I haven't seen any paintball yet. But that's the second that she was like, just literally just sitting there like this. Oh my God, this is so interesting too. And oh, well, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, cool. And so that was when we lost the general.
Did she come back?
The second
did she come?
Oh,
back?
she came right back.
Or did she just?
But the second that we go in,
okay.
No, but it wasn't forever. But the second we go into any sort of paintball montage that's longer than like 30 seconds, where it's like it's a paintball montage, dude. Like, we're doing it for the paintball guys. Like, we're doing it for the people that love the game, that want to see guys getting bunkered, moves to music. And I mean, this is a standard trope within the framework of paintball films ever since, Pat did Push. Like, it's just that, thus it is written, thus it shall be. You do a paintball montage. Like you said, do some hardcore, do a heavy metal song, or do like some punk shit, or if you're some a la Cassidy with HK. And
he did some amazing
stuff. Yeah. Yes, well, do the new generation. Dude, what was drop some hardcore, like deep electronica music, with whatever it may be. But just do an elongated paintball montage, and then a person like my wife went from being like this this is crazy. I had no idea that this is how this went down. And she's just on the edge of her seat. And then now that gives her a second to be like, okay, cool, I'm right back in. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, exactly. So but
dude,
it's just interesting because
here's the next evolution of that. And this is as we try to get some more like outside eyes on our work. The spectacle will actually get you even farther. What I found to be the most disconnected part of a non-core paintball audience is, and that's what some of our other films lacked, is the story of the game. Because you think about Morgan's reaction. So when you're trying to show a distributor or a film festival curator, as soon as we get into, well, I think he shot me out of the back can, but he was in Dorito too. And to have it like, it's just, they're gone. They have no, it's too complex. That's super important, obviously, for your people that like love the game and know it backwards and forwards. That's why I always say, it's all of these layers of these different types of stories. It's a webcast, it's this hardcore, you know, but when you're trying to connect that with other audiences, that isn't, and then if you lay it against like real 3-act storytelling, you know, cliche, Pixie Dream Girl, you know, Luke gets his hand cut off by Vader,
instigating event,
like classic stuff. It doesn't really, it doesn't line up with that stuff. But the people, dude, there's so many incredible people and team stories and struggles. And because paintball's the Wild West, there's been so many iterations of the pro leagues and the teams, and you know, it's like there's a lot of stuff there that people connect to and can potentially connect to. And, you know, I think the other thing too, is like, if you look at a lot of other sports or entertainment endeavors, when they really make success, it is when it connects with non-core people in, you know, like a longer, they might not be there forever, but also in those swaths, you pick up all kinds of new people that you potentially convert to this.
I'm just throwing this out there, but it's kind of like, and because we've watched so much sports, but you have to have, you know, you have your hero, you have your name, and then you have your narrative. You know, you have the name, you have the narrative. So you have the Babe Ruth, and then you have the narrative. Oh, born and raised in a bar in Baltimore. You know, it all alliterates. And then, you know, he came up and he's hitting the ball farther than anyone ever has. He's eating more hot dogs than anyone ever has. He's hooking up with more chicks than anyone ever has. You know, it's just, it this legend starts to happen. And then you want to know what he's going to do next. And so again, heroes and villains, history, what did they do before? Ongoing narrative, what's happening right now? You know, statistics, how do we commodify and take, you know, and make it instead of a subjective measurement, I think this, an objective measurement, you know, all these different things kind of have threaded in with sports. With paintball, we've tried so hard over time with limited resources with what we've had with PBA and Go Sports to try to emulate these things, which is why, again, thank you guys so much for your support, and please continue to give it to us. But the storytelling side of it is huge. And this is why guys like yourself, and this is why I'm so glad that we're having this public conversation, because if you don't have this sort of stuff, then you're not really doing all that you possibly can to make people like, okay, what's going to happen at World Cup? I mean, there's 20 professional paintball teams. Uprising's not there. A team called the Wild Dogs is coming in. No one knows who the hell they are. We'll keep you guys, we're going to give you guys more updates on all this. But literally every single one of those 20 teams has anywhere from 6 to 11 dudes on it, 10, 11 guys. And every single one of those guys has a story. And if you hear a lot of these stories, it's like, you know, even the ones at the bottom of the ranks, is like a lot of people talk shit from the sidelines, like who's this team? These guys suck. Oh, they didn't win at this or that. It's like, and I get it. I totally understand. But as a sucker for story, and as somebody that is on the inside that tries to do my due diligence to bring a lot of these stories to light, but there's so many stories. I mean, again, that's 20 teams, 20 main narratives within the framework of professional paintball. Each, let's just say 10 dudes on each team. That's 200 different stories. Like, I could literally spend every day devoting just to one dude's story. And, you know, it was just, it's like, that's a ridiculous amount of stories, but that's what's possible out there. And a lot of them are super compelling, to be honest. So how do you go about like choosing exactly, obviously it's like, okay, X factor. All right, cool. Here's my story. You know, my story is I'm going to tell this X factor story. But from the layman's perspective, how do you go about narrowing that down? Because there is so much to work with there. You have all the different years that they were involved in the framework of paintball in general, all these different dudes. Like, how do you, as a storyteller, start hatcheting away at your little darlings in order to produce something that you can give to people that, again, is going to make them care about this specific story that you're telling?
So, like, dude, and I'm stealing this from Bill Simmons just immediately, but like, just to be upfront about that. But they were talking about the Andre the Giant documentary they made, and if you're a filmmaker,
it's so good.
If you don't, his quote is basically, if you don't kill one of your babies, if you don't cut something that you immediately from the get-go were like, oh, you know what, I guarantee will be in here is this, like, you probably haven't done it correctly. You know, so you kind of keep that in mind. It's really about, you know, there is, like, I don't want to say a formula because there's a connotation with that word, but there are characters and there's archetypes. And if you can start to think about like who fits into these representations of, you know, of these characters, that's where you kind of start. That's where I start, where it becomes, so the thing with X Factor and what's so interesting about their story, and I think so unique, because I'm hard pressed to think of anybody else like this. I don't mean a franchise like the Iron Man, but X Factor stayed together, most of them, for 14 years and like hit this dip where most other teams just end. And they actually came back and have been more consistent and successful on the back half than when they debuted. So immediately you're like, okay, that's different. That's unique. You know, even when we set out to make the 50 Summers, like our minor league baseball documentary, you know, the B story is the story of minor league baseball through that process, but the A story is Omaha, because Omaha and Kansas City were partners for 50 years, still are, majors and AAA, and that's the longest affiliation in AAA. Second longest in all of the majors. So just as a storyteller, you immediately go, okay, well, you know, that's the old Sesame Street. Like, one of these things is not like the other. Why? Okay. And then as you start to dive into why, it's like, okay, well, do I have, you know, how many threads do I have to pull out? And you might get to a point where you're like, okay, that was cool. Now I know this. There's not that many threads, and maybe that's like a 5-minute story. But if you can keep pulling and you're like, holy crap, there's so much, it's like, okay, like now, you know, then you get to be a bit like a marathon runner of like, can I do TV 30, which is 24 minutes? Can I do TV 60, which is 48 minutes? Can I do an hour and a half? Is there enough meat on the bone? Am I a good enough, you know, storyteller and director to kind of do these things? And that's what got really interesting, again, when we started to look at X Factor and the idea that, you know, also, dude, there's a webcast now. There's all kinds of, you know, excellent, like, augmented content that all of the brands, plus Go Sports, is producing, where it's like, hey, if you want to know about their journey into finishing third at the 2015, you know, NXL Phoenix event or whatever, like, that story is readily available. But if we go deeper and we really tell, you know, people, and this is where you go back to something you had said earlier, Matt, about like trust and like intimacy. And it's like, look, the reason Best Kids in Texas is, you know, being mainstream distributed, and that people watched it and you know, at Gravitas and said, hey, the trailer looks good, send it a screener. Hey, like, we want to do this. Isn't really because of me. It's because of those guys. It's because of the X Factor guys. And they do feel comfortable. You know, we've built a relationship, and then even in doing that stuff, there's trust there between yourself as a storyteller and, you know, the people that you're working with. I won't say truth because we've talked about this before, but I will say authenticity because, and I think it's a Werner Herzog quote that if truth is the most important thing in story, then the New York City phone book would be the greatest piece of literature.
Werner Herzog
100% accuracy.
He's a
I think it was Werner Herzog.
He's a genius.
I might be pulling that from, but you know what I mean? Though it's not about crafting. I'm not talking about Kardashian stuff. That's not what I'm saying. But is that it's getting to the essence, and some of it is subjective. It's not just facts and figures, because otherwise the phone book, yeah, okay, that's all accurate. Matt lives at, 11 Maple Street. Okay, his phone number is blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, is totally, yeah. No, I think but that's kind of gets to my question, or back to my question a little bit, which I think you answered fine, but is that as a storyteller, as somebody that does have to make draconian triage cuts to, because I remember when when Patrick Spohr and I sat there and looked at Heroes for a Day, and we had to create which ended up being a super long movie, which was, I don't know, 3 hours long or whatever it was. It could have been 14 hours long. It could have been a series and now looking back at how things exist now within the framework, I wish that's something that we could have done as a series. So, a 14 episode, hour long situation where we could have watched all the trials and travails of all these different storylines, but we had to sit there and I had to try to be as unselfish as I possibly could at the time too, because I was like, well, this is partly my storyline, which is going to end up on the edit room floor, because Nikki Cuba's storyline is that much more potent at the time, and because we can't just, we can't put out a 14-hour long documentary. This is before, seasons existed within the framework of nonfiction. And so, but that's the thing. When you're dealing with a story like X Factor that has gone on for as long as it has, and then you also kind of have to set things up thematically with the way that things are paced, so much so that, and you had told me a funny anecdote about how one of the screeners was like, does Alex's son die? And you're like,
geez, dude.
No, he doesn't. But yeah, tell me that story.
Yeah. So this is as we're prepping, and again, when you start dealing with the outside world, they're looking for, and even then when you think about it, it's just the way that we watch things. You're conditioned to it. It wasn't at Gravitas. It was the creative director at, not Herd at Films, but Herd at the parent company that owns us, because it's a media marketing and entertainment agency. Max is our art director on it. He's watching it from his wife, and I'm going through making all the final changes and polishes and corrections before it goes to Gravitas. And like, they're texting me as they're watching it, and like, okay, this is cool. And like, it's like all caps. And I'm pretty sure, this is like, does his son die? Because, and like, it pointed out a huge hole in legitimate, the way that you make films, because we're trained, like, if you watch a documentary and they're talking about somebody over and over, and you probably cross the 20-minute mark and that person hasn't appeared yet, your brain, because we've been conditioned by story, they're dead. They're not there. And it wasn't, and so that's one of the things I like most about.
Or they're on the run. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
There's something bad. They are drastically not accessible. Drastically not accessible. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And that wasn't the case. It just didn't work out. So one of the things we took the opportunity in COVID, and it's one of the things that I like about the new version, besides it being like tighter and there being like another 14 minutes of archival footage put in there, was we were able to, at least via a phone interview, talk to Sean Martinez and get his kind of take on it. And it's just like, it just rounds that out a little bit more. But yeah, those are just the kinds of things when you start, doing storytelling and you start doing film and documentary stuff with the bigger audience and the broader rules in mind, you got to think about stuff. And some of that, which are too, what you're talking about cuts you guys had to make. And, one thing I tried to do in the film with Best Kids is at least keep a lot of visual eye candy and nods to people, whether it was in still or photo. Like I got a really awesome text from LB, or I think it was an Instagram message, Brian Fau, who played for Infamous for a long time and Avalanche. And there's a part in there where I think it's a video of him playing Hyperball and then a still of John Richardson. And he's like, thanks. Like, was this kind of like, this was on purpose, right? And I'm like, yeah, it was on purpose, man. What I took out was the rabbit hole explanations in the film for a bigger audience, where they might be like, okay, and then Twisted Factory 2 was above it, and it's like, okay, dude, you're gonna lose. Yeah. You're gonna lose Morgan.
Yeah.
But visually, if we can drop some of that eye candy and make sure, like, it was important to me. Like I said, dude, I hope this opens the door. I hope this isn't just sort of like a one-off. But if this is the only thing, it was important to me, like that. There's an image of the Garners in there. There's a reference to trauma. There's some like things that were from the time period. There's some archival footage of Gerald Garcia. I think there's a clip of Pep or Scute, who played for Avalanche and Bob Long's Iron. Like, I tried to make sure that those things were represented in case this is as close as paintball gets to some other things. But I had to take out the deep, because, dude, we also got, I also was getting feedback again, which it's so funny. If you're in paintball, if you think you've made a really accessible story, you're probably like 30% away from it being accessible. And that includes me, because I would get posts of like, wait, what's Hyperball? Is that different? Like, that's not paint. Is Hyperball paint? Where you're like, oh, you're right. Like, it's so complicated. It's so complicated. So we went back and like we added some more graphics and some stuff like that. But yeah, dude, we take for granted what is clear because you lived or live in this world, but it's very, very hard to express to outsiders.
It is hard, but that's kind of one of the points that we were bringing up before, is that as a paintball storyteller, but also as somebody that understands that, but as a paintball person, it's kind of like, again, with the Ultimate Shootout thing, like I didn't want to, and us as a collective, we didn't want to dumb the Ultimate Shootout down so much that it became boring to play and that no paintball person wanted to be a part of it. One of the reasons that paintball people want to be a part of it is there's multiple ways to victory, and you can get into, you can hit buzzers. There's multiple different buzzers that you can hit. You can go on a kill streak, and it's not super simple. It's not just one dude versus one dude, and if you kill him, that's it. That's the point, which would be easier to describe to people. But that's the thing. Like, when I sit down with somebody, like you've been overseas. I go overseas, and I've had a conversation with somebody that has no idea what American football is, and you try to explain to them what American football is, and they're like, I don't understand. The fat dudes hit each other, and then the little guys run around, and then when you score, it's 6 points, but then the other little dude kicks the ball through the thing. Like, why are the things up there? But it's 1 point there. But if you kick it at this other point, it's 3 points. Like, none of this makes any sense, dude. And then, like, there's downs. Like, what's a down? I don't get it. But once you get it, it becomes the most popular sport in American history. Or baseball, which also is like, there's a famous, I think it was an Adam Sandler movie, but it's like this joke about how the rules of baseball came to be, which are completely ridiculous. But also, that has been a super potent sport in American in America, in popularity in American mindsets for 150 years. So so that's kind of that double-edged sword, like, yes, if it's easier to make people understand, you can, but it needs to be fascinating enough that people want to, like, I wouldn't say give their life to it, but like in a lot of ways that's the case. I know there's a lot of people that give their lives to Call of Duty. Like, they go work, they have their family, they do their thing, but what they really love the most is playing Call of Duty, and they play it every chance they possibly can, or whatever your video game is. But the more popular that video, the more difficult and complicated that video game is, the more that simulated that reality is, where you got to get it, kind of like our reality. Our reality is a lot of bullshit you got to deal with in our reality, but that's our reality. But it's addictive in a way because you want to crack into that thing. And that's what I'm saying is, like, I just think that as a general rule going forward with paintball, that making it simpler isn't necessarily what we need to do, because we've got that pushback occasionally. What are your thoughts on that?
So, all right. So there's a couple things, dude. I would say, like, and this would have to be, I guess, of a certain time, or you're a certain age that this would make sense. Yeah, but okay, so you're telling that story about that European person, but I'm going to, like, round out that character in my story. But that person that you're talking to, and this is why you decided to talk to them, they do not like it, they don't understand it, but they're wearing an Oakland Raiders jacket because they're like, yeah, badass. And maybe that's a thing more to branding, but that is like, I don't know anything about what's going on here, but I know that, like, and if you go through the lore of American football in the 70s and early 80s, they were absolutely the pirate ship of Kenny Stabler and, like, Wild Men, where people are like, okay, I'm connecting with that. The thing about simpler and going forward, and, like, dude, I certainly am in no position, especially because I don't really work in the industry now to sort of make a recommendation, but I'll make sort of like an observation. And paintball just has to figure out maybe what works for them. I was talking about this on somewhere else too. People are really misunderstood. People don't really understand about the X Games a lot of important information. Skateboarding hated the X Games when it started. Hated it. This isn't real skating. Like, it wasn't. I mean, there in '95, it's a vert contest. In '95, when vert's almost dead and it's all about street, and it evolved and people came around to kind of meet in the middle. But what ultimately happened there, or maybe more so with Tony Hawk Pro Skater, but it became acceptable that, like, okay, the entry point is going to be, the initial story, the, textbook that you get with your 100 level class is going to be different and simpler and easier than the textbook that you get with your 300 level class. The entry point was going to look and be different for new people to be accessible and to kind of have this crossover. But the hope is that, somebody sees Paul Rodriguez skate now and then really dives in. Again, although, like, X Games has really gotten, on the skating side, closer grounded to what's going on. There's street league. You'll also have super hardcore Dogtown guys, Dwayne Peters guys that are like, this is all BS. It should be completely outlaw. And but I think that's something for paintball to sort of, the sport and pros would sort of have to decide is it acceptable that the game that is the window to the world is different? Or is it stuff like Best Kids in Texas? Or is it both of them? But I think that's kind of where it comes down to.
There's so many different ways to take that. And I've had this like ongoing conversation. I feel that if the first place that people mostly meet paintball is to go play Cowboys and Indians, that's not super politically correct these days, but just go play war in general. And they want to go just play war in the woods. Like, that's what most people kind of first came into paintball doing, whether it's at a birthday party but it's not typically like I'm going to go play the sport of paintball and I'm going to be a snake player. Like, whereas if it's baseball, like that's commodified. It's like when you go, you show up, you decide, okay, I'm outfield. You're playing third base, second base, shortstop. You're going to be a pitcher. Like that's the way it is. With paintball, typically speaking, most people when they first interact with it, unless their mom or dad played it or whatever it may be, they're not like, I'm going to be a 1 in the snake, or I'm going to be a 3, or I'm a 2 on the D side. Like that's not what they're doing. I'm going to go and we're playing war at a bachelor party or birthday party when I'm 13, and here's a bunch of rental guns, kids. We're on like some hybrid field or whatever, depends on where you are in the world, and hey, go after it. Like that's your entree into paintball. So if that's what people's minds are, again, this is a long conversation. I don't really want to cannibalize your time talking about this specific thing, because I just think that,
dude,
I'm sorry, you got something for me?
Well, yeah, because it's a story about. I mean, this is about the distribution and the distributor of Best Kids in Texas, or our path to it, but how it sort of ties into what you're talking about, right? We screened it a couple films festivals. Somebody followed up with us. We sent him the screener, and this is what the guy said: "Hey, wow, that was really cool. ... I had no idea this world existed. ... And I had just taken paraphrasing now at this point, but my son's 14 and we just went and played somewhere a couple weeks ago, and I think they were in Southern California, and I didn't know this world existed." There's still this kind of, maybe that's not where you were going, Matty, with that. I'm sorry, but I still find that is fascinating. In 2019. That's the case.
For sure. No, I don't know. I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's kind of where I was wondering from a storyteller's perspective, the fact that we are a sport where it, like we paint it up nice. We're like, oh yeah, markers. These aren't, we're just having a good time out here, just, playing some paintball, but let's not get away from the fact that we're trying to play war. And that's essentially the gist of it. Like no one's dying. It's all fun. But at the same time, like that's what we're pretending to do, which is an amazing thing in and of itself. But I think that's one of the potent things that we have. So to take away that potent thing, to take away what people's first interpretations of it and be like, no, that's not paintball at all. It's this thing over here, and this is all that it is. I just think that we're taking away, again, one of the potent spectacles, one of the potent punches that we could have to make people care about what it is in a transition. Even though, absolutely, dude, I spent my entire early adult life totally dedicated to playing tournament paintball and loving every minute of it and seeing all the blessings that sort of life gives to you, the travel, dealing with stress and strife and struggle, all these different people. It's an amazing thing. But I think that, again, when you look at the lessons that were learned from when you watch the Best Kids in Texas and seeing and this is kind of, again, I wish I could keep you here all night, but there's a couple of questions that I feel people might want to know. Well, one that I want to ask you about, one, seeing the evolution of these characters. And I asked Archie about this when we had Archie on last week, and we talked about his evolution, because you're a father of a daughter. I'm a father of a son now. And I'm looking at the world and I'm like, and one of the things that Ryan Gray said was that, people would show up and drop their kids off and they'd have these conversations with them like, hey man, I need to know what type of man you are if I'm going to leave my sons with you. And this is some real shit that we need to discuss, and seeing how, we kind of coddle and nerf the world now. And I feel that paintball is not that place. It really never has been. It's definitely never been that place. It still is not that place, but it's a place that it still is pretty safe. It's safe enough. You can learn hardcore lessons and toughen yourself up in an environment that, yeah, sure, it's going to be a little harsh, but not harsh enough to destroy you, but harsh enough to make you solid, to make you stronger. And that's one of the things that you see in this documentary. You see these young kids come up and they become hard by participating in these situations, and then they go on to become the best team in the world. In that moment, I think that's super cool. So there's that question, and then also the question that's totally different, but is how the hell do you get a documentary film on iTunes? A lot of people probably want to know that too. So that's like another thing that I want to throw at you. But start with the first thing, because you are a father. You're a father. You're a father.
So what's the question? What's the question in the first? I know what you're talking about, but what are you asking? What's the question?
The question is that as a father in this modern age, do you think it's important to have your child participate in something that doesn't have everything padded? That everything is not okay. Everyone gets the same. The result is the same. Everybody wins. Everyone gets a cupcake. Like, you know, your daughter just went to college. Like,
yeah,
I know how you grew up. And you are not from that. You are not from that era. Like, that's not how. You're not a fan of that. So I want your thoughts on that, though.
I'm not a participation trophy person. I think if everybody, it's just my opinion, but if everybody wins, then it doesn't mean anything. And I like things that have meaning to it. Something that is interesting in the film, though, when you start talking about coaching and mentoring and what that means is what that looks like, and you almost run this gambit of Jeremy Hazelwood, Ryan Gray, and Alex Martinez and they have a different approach. And Alex is not a softie in that, like, he has standards and expectations and has the right, so I think it's interesting, and I hope what somebody see in the film is that an evolution, or that there are different ways. But yeah, dude, I think that's a very important, standards are important, expectations are important. If, you tell everybody, you just can't have, mom goggles doesn't make anybody better. And I take that in like my filmmaking. Dude, I show everything to Brad. I have this little inner circle of 3 or 4 people, and I show everything to Brad. And again, I'm not saying that this is the blueprint for the world, but this is for me what works. Like, Brad's not there to mom goggle it and tell me how great everything is. Brad is there to, like, where it's, supposed to be, rip shit apart that needs to be ripped apart. This doesn't make sense. What is going on with that color grade? Dude, you lost me here. This is like, and that's a privilege. It really is. If somebody is willing to take the time, I don't mean to blast you on Twitter. That's ridiculous. But I mean, if somebody's willing to invest the time and look at your work, or your work being, if you're an athlete, and say, like,
constructive criticism.
Yeah.
Constructive criticism.
You can take
in
that
a real way.
Yeah. Yes. Like I said, I grew up and played baseball into college. If somebody's willing to watch you throw and be like, hey, dude, like, your arm's behind, like, your foot is down before your turn, you're going to be behind on everything. Like, I'm not a big person to be like, that's just my style, man. Like, hey, that person's trying to help you get better. They don't have to be, and hopefully they're not, like, degrading about it, because that's not a positive thing. But yeah, dude, I think, standards and expectations and that kind of stuff is really important. And, I think, yeah, X Factor is the result of some really good different mentors.
So talk to me. Last question, because again, because I can't keep you here all night. But so last question: how the hell does one, as a human being and a storyteller, get a film to where you've got your films? 50 Summers now with Best Kids in Texas. I mean, you're starting to get films into places that people want to get films. Like, how does this work?
Well, yeah, that's what you were saying earlier. You don't just, at least if you're us and you're in our run, like, you don't just call Netflix and are like, hey, bro, got a new film. Or you're not, like, on the list where they're like, hey, hey, do you want to make this film for us exclusively? which is part of it. So you kind of have, in this world, you have two categories of content of these films and these series. You have things that Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime are commissioning. You know, Last Dance, that sort of, we're not in that world yet. We don't live in, they're not calling us, not yet. Then our other world on how these other things and documentary films and stuff get there is you have a process of your production company, a distributor, and then it ends up on like a channel. Like I mentioned earlier, like I'm super fortunate. I work for a company called Hurrdat Films, and for the last 2 years that I did Eclipse content, I was working for Hurrdat, and they came over. Hurrdat Films is owned by it's just called Hurrdat Media Marketing and Entertainment, agency, and we started, working to get distribution on these things. You can go the film festival route, they help sometimes. It's still a weird algorithm cabal-y, like you don't totally know. For us and our company, and me as director, 50 Summers, the baseball documentary, was what got there first. It's narrated by Rob Riggle. There's some hefty people that appear in it for a hot second. It's about minor league baseball. So George Brett appears in it. Warren Buffett appears in it for a minute because he owned the team in Omaha. And we hooked up with Gravitas Ventures. This is a really good distributor. I mean, they're very well respected in indies and doing docs. They did Dave Grohl's Sound City. And we got 50 Summers, in the door with them. And so you go through this whole process of, do you go to iTunes first? And then, your distributor is the person who is getting your content on those platforms into iTunes Store, then potentially onto a Netflix, a Hulu, an HBO, etc. And we were fortunate enough, they reached out. We actually had 2 distributors interested in Best Kids in Texas, weirdly. So some of that is, we've got an awesome president that's the head of our studio, Bill Hipsher. Having those advocates that are executives are awesome, and can really help. I mean, that really is what helps, get some of that stuff. So it gets seen. So they even look at, hey, send me a trailer. Okay, this looks decent. Send me a screener. Okay, are they going to make it? How far through the screener are they going to make it? Are they going to, and either stop and say like, cool, we think that this is something here that will work, or them being like, oh, this is ridiculous, and these guys are terrible. They just made a good trailer. So that's kind of the process. I mean, we're still like, hopefully we can catch back up in 3 months or 6 months, and I'll tell you exactly how we got it to Netflix, because we still haven't gotten that far in the Zelda. We've iTunes, Amazon Prime, Amazon streaming. We've navigated those levels of Zelda. We still have another one to go that hopefully we'll get it on to Netflix. Interestingly enough, it's like a weird, Netflix is huge, but it's also really status-y, just in that, like, I think technically Amazon Prime reaches more people. But we all think of more of a Netflix or even on some degree like a Hulu as the almost the Kleenex of streaming, where that's become, oh gosh, I forget the terminology. It's not an acronym, but where it's technically a tissue, but Kleenex is so over that it's just what you call it now. Netflix has had some of that stuff. So yeah, you have people. We had some really cool support from film festival people that would screen it, and then and that went for both of our films, and that gets eyeballs on it. You just try to get people who make decisions, you try to get their eyeballs on it, and you hope that you told like a good enough story. And you also have to have levels of production value that are like adequate, and that's this little dial, right? Last Dance is amazing. It's shot with 2 of the best reds, but like if Michael Jordan is what your documentary is about, I always feel like, okay, you can dial down the production value thing a little bit. Like our films are about people on the grand stage that nobody knows. It's like, okay, those things like better be like really up to snuff. They better not have too many mistakes in them.
Well, you absolutely, Dan, you killed it. I saw this most recent cut. I watched it with my wife, and who really, she loves paintball people, but doesn't really care all that much, to be honest, because that's not her thing. And she came out of it thinking it was awesome. But yeah, man, you've you've knocked it out the park every single time that you've touched it, and we've been blessed to have you involved in the paintball industry. Anyone you want to thank? Any last thoughts before we sign off?
Oh gosh, man. I mean, dude, it's a two-way street. Like I have, even though I'm kind of really not working in it anymore, like paintball and people in paintball have given me incredible things in my life. I've met so many fantastic people. I got so many opportunities. I mean, I literally wouldn't be in so many ways where I am today without opportunities that came from people like Ed Portman, that came from Pat and Brian, Leds and Eclipse. I can't really say enough about, those guys really committing to telling story and then being able to like learn through that. So yeah, man, I mean, like the pleasure is been all mine. I mean, there's still a handful of paintball stories I'd really like to tell. They're not current ones per se, but maybe someday we'll kind of get to tell a couple of those things. But like, yeah, man, it's been incredible. I feel like super blessed to have met, like I have friends and people from all walks of life all over the globe that I've gotten to meet through paintball. And that's probably really the best thing about the game, right?
That's why I call them the gifts of the game, man. You get the gifts of the game. If you really give a shit and you get into it and you're good at what you do, things open up, people open up, opportunities open up, and the next thing you know, you could be anywhere in the world and you'll get to experience that place like you live there instead of like you're a tourist. And yeah, it's a cool thing. But Dan, you've been a special person in a special game. And I thank you so much for all the work that you have done. Thank you so much for sitting in with us here at Go Sports Live. Again, everyone, right now, Best Kids in Texas is streaming. Dan, give me the elevator pitch right now just before we sign off.
Best Kids in Texas. It's on iTunes, Amazon Prime. We're coming to international VOD on November 11th. So finally, because our distributor was like, "Oh, I didn't realize people everywhere would be into this," and we're like, "Yes, dude, everybody's getting blown up very nicely, of course, but from people in Sweden and Australia. Where can I see this?" It's different. If anybody had seen early versions at a film festival or on PB Nation, this has added like footage from 2019. It's got 14 minutes more of archival footage, even though it's 3 minutes shorter. We've got some extra interview bits in there, Dolby surround sound, color grade, so it looks better if you're a film file. There's like good, cool things in there. And we're, hoping that this gets to be the first paintball documentary that ends up on, or pro paintball documentary that ends up on Netflix. We're doing a lot of fun stuff on the social media channels, which are all some derivative of like Best Kids in Texas film. So if you don't want to grab a download or you don't feel like streaming the film again or whatever, you can interact with us on social. We're posting lots of archival footage, lots of archival stills. And response has been really cool from paintball so far. Like everybody's been incredibly supportive. It's been really fun to interact with some people again on some stuff like that. So yeah, we hope to keep it up.
Again, Dan, thank you so much for tuning in. Everyone, definitely check out Best Kids in Texas where it is streaming, and Monday Night Paintball coming at you here every single Monday. Next up is going to be Jeremy Zimmerman taking on Fred Berkeley. World Cup is on the horizon, as well as the Virginia Pro Paintball Exhibition Halloween weekend. I'm Matty Marshall. Dan Napoli, thank you so much for sitting in here to Go Sports Live. I'll see you guys next week.
So thanks for having me.
Balls in a hand.
Never thought as a collective of young kids would we ever make it. It really came down to one guy that said, I'm going to see what they can do.
Sometimes in life you got to take that jump. We won a pro event our first year, and that almost never happens.
Success can be like one of the worst things.
I don't know what Grayson's talking about. I probably won the argument.
We need to just kill this now.
Ask who's going to stick around and who's not, but we're not going out this way.
Texas Paintball